On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to Life Science Success Podcast, Jason.
Thank you very
Great
much.
to have you here, and it's great to have you be a part of Bio 2023 as well. It's just such an exciting event.
It
as
is.
well.
I think it's really nice to be here because it kind of feels like this is almost like the first proper big partnering conference after COVID, that it's not a hybrid event. You've got to be here, and you can see downstairs that, because it's heaving down there, and it has been literally since, it's all opened up. It's just really nice to be back in it.
Yeah, I'm watching people just getting their badges. I mean, we just got past lunchtime here. I'm not exactly sure when I'll be able to release this episode, but we just got past lunchtime, and you still see the queue to get tags to get your
we
badge.
were sensible. We came yesterday. Together because we thought it would be like this.
See, I didn't think that, and I showed up. I was here early this morning because I've been doing our interviews all day. But it's great to have you here, and like you said, it's great to be a part of another big conference again.
Absolutely,
So,
feels like it kind of feels like we're back to normal.
Yes,
at last.
So can you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself? Who are you, and what has your career been, and what led you eventually to Ubiquigent, where you currently are?
Sure. So my name is Jason Mundin. I'm the CEO of Ubiquigent, and Ubiquigent is a company we are just over 13 years old. We're based in Scotland. I'm actually based in Cambridge in the UK, and I zip backwards and forwards to Scotland as often as I'm summoned or needed. I've worked in biotechnology, drug discovery, pharmaceutical industry for just over 30 years. I know it looks amazing because I look so young, but I started when I was 10. I began my career at Glaxo in the UK, and I went straight into Glaxo at the age of 18 because I was really fortunate that when I was 16 and I was at an early stage studying, Glaxo was running kind of tours. And you could go in and you could do a biology tour, you could do a chemistry tour.
Nice.
And I was studying biology and chemistry, and I wanted to do the biology one because that's always been the thing that fired me up. And I went in as a little 16-year-old, and it was the first time I'd ever been anywhere like that, and started to see the labs and talking to the people who were doing the drug discovery. And I actually met someone then who I ultimately ended up working for.
Oh, wow.
Which was really good. He gave a fantastic talk about how they were progressing, or how they'd initiate a drug discovery program in a cardiovascular area. And from that moment, I was hooked. So where a lot of my friends were kind of like, studying, and at 18, go off to university, get a degree, wasn't interested. I wanted to go and work there. And I was quite lucky then that it was almost like an apprenticeship. So you could join at 18, and then Glaxo sponsored me to do my degree. So I would work, work like 4 days a week, and then they would let me go to university for 1 day a week. Took longer, took 5 years to get through, to get to the point of graduation. But it was brilliant because you were getting all the academic side of things from the university, but you were immediately putting it into practice.
And did they have you working in a lab right away then? Wow.
So it was literally on day one, here's a Gilson pipette. I'd never held one. And a fantastic training. So you were trained by, it was the whole team. So I went into a thrombosis project. So it's a team of people that were trying to find something that was better than aspirin. But you were trained by your peers and the management, and everyone was really inclusive. And in fact, the whole department was really, really well structured. And it just took you along with it, and it was just a really nice environment. And then that 1 day a week you went to university, and you were in lectures with the full-time students who didn't have that same level of exposure, and it was amazing because basically the part-timers used to run rings round. Right. Because it's kind of like we've done all of this, and you could immediately see how things can be applied. So rather than it being purely academic, you were there the next day, you were back in the lab. And it was, I think, it was a shame, or it is a shame, that I don't think those sorts of opportunities are open to many people now It was a really routine thing there. Glaxo did it. SmithKline, it was a separate organization then. SmithKline did it. So we met people from SmithKline. You started to build networks. You didn't realize you were kind of building networks. But it worked really well. So I spent 8 years there. So I completed my degree. I'd had the exposure to, I think, about 7 or 8 different drug discovery programs, lots of different technical experiences. So very much, hands-on drug discovery scientist. Then Glaxo and Wellcome went into a merger. Company it really changed the way that it organized its research. When I was at Glaxo to start with, it was very much you were part of a project from the point of inception all the way through to the point where hopefully you were handing compounds over to your colleagues in clinical development. GW went through a period where it kind of compartmentalized things a bit more. So you were doing early stage screening, you were doing in vivo, you were doing this part of it. And it was I found it a bit of a struggle because you just didn't see the whole arc of a program.
Sure.
At the same time, as a consequence of that, there was a lot of flux. People were leaving the company, and one person who left was someone who I'd never actually worked for, but I'd got to know him quite well. He was someone who'd worked in the respiratory area, and he was leaving with someone actually from SmithKline that he knew to form a new company, and it was a biotech company called Pharmaceutical Laboratories, and that was focused on the use of human tissue, and that's something I'd been doing a lot of at Glaxo. And I just thought, this is great. This is, I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. I'd only ever worked in a large pharma company where you had, all the resources and all the comforts that you had. And then I jumped ship and went into a biotech company, and there were 10 of us on day one. We had 1.5 million of seed funding, and we were literally sat in an empty warehouse. And the CEO at the time literally went round the table and pointing at people saying, we need phones. You can do the phones. We need a lab. You're going to do the lab. And I loved it.
I've been a part of the same meetings.
Absolutely. I loved it. And it was, my thought was at the time, because I was only in my sort of mid-20s, if this doesn't work, I'll get another job. This is low risk. But oh my word, I learned so much about basically how to build and execute drug discovery programs in a completely different environment. And I actually ended up spending 10 years there. And it was whilst I was there that I made the transition from being a bench scientist going into commercial. Because I'd kind of got to the point where I didn't want to go and do a PhD. I did really enjoy the science, and I was kind of quite sure, where am I going to go next? And the company did a really smart thing, because it had come to the conclusion that it needed a commercial team. And it thought, we can do one of two things. We can either just hire in people, or we can see whether or not is there anyone in-house that would want to gravitate in that direction? And they actually did a bit of both. So they hired a VP of business development, and then they just ran some seminars internally about business development process, what it could mean for a company like Pharmagene. It'll be in this seminar room. If you want to come, you can. Don't worry about it if you don't want to. Completely open. So a few of us went, and actually myself and a colleague went, and it was just like a light bulb moment. You think, that's what I've been looking for.
Yeah, whenever I see your LinkedIn profile, it says like sales, operations, and what I'm piecing together in my head is these are all of those things.
I didn't realize it at the time, but it's kind of like furnishing yourself with all the skills that you need later on. But basically, again, the company, it was just such a good opportunity. They basically said, you can move to business development. We've brought a consultant in to give you a bit of training, 6 weeks. It's nothing. And if it doesn't work out in a year, you can have your old job back. Why would you not take it? So I did it. And again, it was a bit like the jump to Pharmagene in the first place. It's like, I'm not quite sure what I'm doing, but it feels like the right thing. And again, never looked back. It was great. And it was everything from, that company also had a kind of a hybrid model. So we had a service business and we had a therapeutics business. And on the CRO side that I was involved in, we had nothing. It was kind of, we've got to define the offering. Who are we selling to? How do we price this? How do we do it? How do we run the project? Who's doing the invoicing? Everything. And got involved in that, and then so I think it was 2 years into my time at Pharmagene, and then I was there for a total of 10 years. So I did 8 years in commercial. And I had experience of, business development in the UK, Europe, US. Used to come here a huge amount of, it was long before you could do, a team call. You had to be in the room. So I clocked up lots of air miles. And then the other thing that happened is the CEO and the CSO used to disappear off to Japan once a quarter, and there'd be a big flurry of activity, and then nothing would happen. And the Japanese market was really good for a company like Pharmagene because there were a number of kind of cultural challenges, I suppose is the best way of putting it, about working on human tissue. But all of the Japanese pharmaceutical companies, understood the value, target species, we want to be doing this. So there was a really good fit. But yeah, the CEO and the CSO would go out there and there'd be lots of emails flying backwards and forwards. And then I just said to them, well, why don't I come? I'll come. Partly because I was thinking, I've never been to Japan. I'd really like to go. I'll go because this needs to be driven. And then that took over my life. So I ended up spending 5 years, the last 5 years, half the time I was there, going backwards and forwards to Japan I was going every 5 to 6 weeks for a week to 10 days at a time, working with a Japanese agent, a couple of Japanese agents over the time to give me some insight and experience and support in terms of how to do business in a very different market. And then that was it. That was what I was doing. So I looked at my passport after I left, and I think I clocked up something like 55 trips to Japan, something like that. So I know I worked out that I spent over a year in total in Japan, but I'd spread it over 5. So that went really well and built up a really nice network in Japan, and it generated a really solid revenue base. I mean, it took time to build up those relationships, but they were hard won, but they were proper relationships. Absolutely solid, really good people. But then I was approaching the point where I'd been with the company 10 years. I was the longest serving employee, and I was still only in my early 30s. And I was thinking, why? There's a decision to be made now. Am I going to stay? And if I stay, I could be here. This could be it. I could never leave. If I'm going to go, I should go now.
Sure.
And then at the same time, the company was going into a merger with a US company that was focused on human tissue, but it was a different business model. So where we had never sold tissue, they sold tissue. And there was a bit of a challenge. And I just thought, there's a big change coming. And I think I think now's a good time to leave. So I took the decision, spoke to the CEO at the time, had a very, very, amicable separation. In fact, I had a 9-month glide out because I didn't want all those relationships with the Japanese companies. I didn't just want to disappear overnight.
Sure.
I wanted to transition those over for the sake of the people on the client side, but also for the sake of the company. And then I left to go and do an MBA.
I've never heard anybody leaving a company for 9 months.
Because it was very much those relationships are built up around individuals. Mm-hmm. If I'd have just disappeared overnight, it wouldn't have made any difference to me. It would have been fine, but it would have hurt the company.
Sure.
And also I didn't want to feel like I was leaving all of those people that had trusted me and trusted the company high and dry.
So important.
So I drifted out over that period and then left to go and do an MBA because up until then, I just thought all of my formal training, quote unquote, had been in the sciences. I thought, you're in commercial now. It would be nice. And it was a little bit of a luxury to do it, but it would be nice to kind of get off the merry-go-round and do some formal training in a business context.
Sure.
I'd already covered a lot of ground anyway, and probably more ground than a lot of people had done or a lot of my peers had done just because of the type of company that I'd worked in. Because you kind of just had to get on and do it, whether you knew what you were doing or not. So I went to Imperial College, did an MBA full-time for a year. I got a very supportive wife who was very happy for me not to earn money for a year, but it was great. And then when I went into that, I actually thought, I'm not going to go back into the pharmaceutical industry.
Uh-oh.
So it's like time for complete change.
Yeah.
And that's how I started. And I met a fantastic group of people there. It was such a good experience. Nobody else had come from the same background. So I was essentially the only biological scientist in there. There were some people who'd worked in the record industry, the oil industry, all kinds of different things. 3 months in, I just thought, no, I want to get back into pharma biotech. That's what I love. And it's because of what I was being exposed to and you actually learn more actually from the people, the rest of the cohort, than you do from any of the lectures. I was desperate to get back into the industry, so I completed the MBA. That went really well, and then I came back into the industry, and I actually came into work for a technology company that was still in pharma, but it was kind of a deliberate move to come in at a different point to get some experience in there. And then over the next few years, I worked at 2 or 3 small companies. I worked at a company called Population Genetics. That was one of Sydney Brenner's companies. That was a really good company, but it was a really good example of where a technology can be overtaken. Mm-hmm. So Sydney had come up with this strategy where this was before you could do the $1,000 genome, when sequencing was still really expensive. He'd come up with an approach where you could basically pull the genomes for a large number of people, tag them, sequence them in one go, and then bioinformatically deconvolute it. So you could basically get the same amount of data, but you did it in a different way. But then Illumina came out with a MiSeq and just blew it out of the water. So that was, again, it's a learning experience, overtaken by that. I left there and then went to the European Bioinformatics Institute. And there I worked alongside Janet Thornton, who was the director of the Institute at that time, and fantastic group of people there. I mean, it really is. It's a really interesting place because it's half academia and half not. And it's hard to describe it, but it's just manned by the brightest people you've ever come across. And it was in that era. It's all about big data, and these guys know how to handle it,
right,
to get real useful insights out of data. So I stayed there for a couple of years, and as part of that, I worked with Janet and the Sanger Institute and actually GSK, and we set up what was then called the Center for Therapeutic. I've got to get the name on it. It was the Center for Therapeutic Target Validation. It's now called Open Targets.
Oh, okay.
Whilst I was there, I was then approached by someone who I'd known all the way back in my PharmaGene days. He had been a CEO of a number of different biotech companies, but I used to quite often see him in Japan. He'd been on the board of Population Genetics, a guy called Mark Traherne. And then Mark approached me about Ubiquigent and said, at that time, they were looking for a commercial director. Were you interested? I did what everyone else would do. I looked at the website and thought, no, I'm not interested. Because I looked at the website and thought, it's a reagent company. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing at all. But that doesn't really excite me. And then he said to me, I told him that. And he said, no. He said, that's part of the problem. The website is one thing that needs to be changed. Me, one of the founders, and it's a guy called Jason Brown. And I sat down with Jason and he told me more about the company. And that's when I just thought, well, there is definitely something here. I'd done a bit of due diligence around the Ubiquigent system because I hadn't had much exposure to it. And everyone I'd spoken to had kind of said, yeah, this is interesting. There's something to be done here. Mm-hmm. And I looked at what the team at Ubiquigent, which was literally 3 people at that point, what they'd done and what they had. And I thought there is a seed there of something that could be quite exciting. Could we take that and actually do something a little bit similar to what happened at PharmaGene, build up that capability, build up a CRO business, but at some point start using that for your own drug discovery. So I joined in 2015. It's been a slow burn, but I joined in 2015 as commercial director. I then took over I think it was within 18 months, I became managing director and then CEO. Same job, different title. And took the company from being just 3-4 of us. There's now 10 of us. And it was a loss-making biotech company. And then we got it into profitability. Probably won't be profitable this year because we've invested a lot of money into our own drug discovery. But it's just, I suppose we've been biding our time whilst the Ubiquigent system and exploitation of it came of age.
Sure.
And now, particularly around the D-ubiquitinases, now is the right time. So we can see there are D-ubiquitinase inhibitors that have entered clinical development, which is really exciting. And there's the emergence of this new modality that's TPS, targeted protein stabilization, and bifunctional molecules that can basically hijack some of these enzymes to stabilize targets, proteins, where you can use them in theory to treat diseases where the loss of protein function or the loss of the protein is the driver of the disease. So a DubTac allows you to kind of rescue a protein to some degree, and then that will lead to a therapeutic benefit. So with Ubiquigent, we've been running this kind of hybrid approach for the last few years, and it's done really well for us. But now we've kind of got to the point, because we've got some drug discovery programs that are really early, but they're showing promise. We need to make that. We need to take that leap and evolve the company into being basically a DubTac focused therapeutics company. So that's what we're in the process of doing. And part of the reason I'm at Bio this year is talking to our partners, talking to other pharma companies and biotech companies that are interested in this space, seeing whether we can partner around some of our programs or strategic partnerships around TPS. Also talking to some investors. And actually, since the beginning of the year, myself and our CSO, Sheila Frame, we've been actively engaged with the investment community about securing inward investment so we can focus exclusively on our drug discovery. So that's kind of where we are today. We find ourselves, it's kind of after we've been playing the long game, but we are now in the right place at the right time with almost everything that we need to really execute some of these programs. And we've seen some other really good companies emerge in the space, which I see as a real positive, because you think it's not just us.
Sure.
This is a good idea. There's others out there. And those companies also represent opportunities for partnerships and collaborations. I don't kind of look at the world in terms of, competitors, because I just think you can always work together. There's a big world out there. And that's kind of where we are. So that was a very long answer to your question.
And so you still have both the drug discovery side and the CRO side inside of Ubiquigent?
We do. At the moment, we do. And when we secure the funding, I'm really keen that we are always an outwardly focused company. Mm. So this isn't about, oh, great, we've raised the money, let's bring the shutters down and that's it. We'll squirrel away in the background. Still want to have, partnerships. We've been in this area, I think, probably longer than most other companies. And we've got some fantastic relationships with companies that are active in the dub space. I'm not going to say we're working with everyone, but we probably work with most of them. And that's great, because I just see that there's just open doors everywhere. So we might move away, or in fact, we will move away from maybe some of the more routine, smaller CRO projects, and move much more towards where we can really add value in a much more strategic way. And also by contributing our own intellectual property, our own compounds and insight in a range of different therapeutic areas. So it's not a binary flip. It is an evolution. Many companies, I think, have gone down this road where they've kind of started as CRO, gone to hybrid. Some have pivoted back and gone and focused on being a CRO, others therapeutic. But us, I think the far greater opportunity is definitely to go down the therapeutic road rather than focus on CRO. So yeah, it's a really exciting time.
Very good. One of the key themes for this year, kind of the key motto for this year is stand up for innovation. When you think about Ubiquigent, how does Ubiquigent align with that theme?
I think in a number of ways. I mean, we're almost forced to be innovative because we've got no money. Well, but I mean, it's true. The resources that we have are limited as a small biotech, but our aspirations are not limited. So you're going to have to be innovative in terms of how you're going to get there. So yeah, one strategy is, we'll try and raise the money, get that in, and we'll go down that route. Others are, trading off. We've got, is there an innovative deal structure that we can do here? We don't need to own everything. I'd rather have 50% of something than 100% of nothing. Are there other ways that we can answer key scientific questions in an efficient way? And the rest of the team at the company, they're really good at problem solving and not necessarily going at something in a standard way. So I think we work quite hard at building a team that has got quite a diverse set of experiences and come from different backgrounds, academic and commercial. And I think that works really well. So it's not you look at the team inside the company, and it's not, everyone is different, quite different, but it works really well.
Sure.
It sometimes can be, you sometimes get a little bit of friction, but that's a good thing. But I think it's kind of the right environment to foster innovation. I mean, you can't, innovation is a really tricky one because it kind of happens. And I think the way it happens is you've got to create the environment, and then you do that. There's not a formula for it. So I'd say we're very much innovative from a scientific perspective. We certainly are from a commercial perspective, driven by the fact that you've got limited resources. So, you've got to use them in different ways. And you've also got to be prepared to take a few risks.
Sure.
And that can be tricky when your resources are limited, but you've got to do it.
Yeah.
And also, if you're asking someone else to invest in you, that's a risk as well. If you're not prepared to risk,
Sure. Right.
what are you doing?
Right.
So I think it's certainly something that is constantly at the front of our minds, just because I suppose it's the whole necessity being the mother of invention.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess in terms of the conference, is there anything in particular that would make this one of the best conferences, as you get ready to walk away? Is
Well,
there
if someone gives me a check, that'd
there
be
you
fantastic.
go.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I think it's about understanding and being able to connect with people that will start to see the value around this kind of TPS-based approach. It's happening, and I think it's going to happen. I think this area is actually almost going to grow quicker than the PROTAC TPD space did, because it's coming after it. So because the two approaches are based on the design and development of bifunctional molecules, so that bind two different things at the same time. The PROTAC space has been, there's been some amazing things done in that, but it's been hard. But a lot of the lessons that have been learned are transferable into this space. There's a whole load of other things that we haven't encountered yet, but it's that whole, you're not starting from complete zero. And I think that's another exciting aspect of this, that there's a lot you can build on. There's a lot of knowledge out there. And I think being able to, reconnect personally with, a lot of people that we know in the space, and explore and have these kinds of discussions about how this might be able to work in disease areas that have been not overlooked, but just not really well addressed, just because they're hard.
Mm-hmm.
Is an exciting opportunity again. I mean, for me this year, this is actually quite basic. It's just the ability. It's the fact it's being able to come to a conference, not worrying that half the people are going to be dialing in on a video call. They're here, and being able to have those discussions face to face.
Yeah.
Because even though, Teams and everything, Zoom saved us in the pandemic, there's never any substitute for sitting down with someone face to face.
It's true. So true. There are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. Okay. What inspires you?
What inspires me? In the context of my work life, or just
could
generally?
Be your work life or your personal life. I have some people answer it one way and some people answer it the other way. Totally up to you. It's your question.
I suppose what I find inspirational is people being open and honest. And I'll use an example. It's like in politics. At the moment, I think we live in an age where, and I'm talking about the UK. I'm not going to comment on US
come on
politics.
over to the United States.
But it's
Sure.
It's almost, people saying what people want to hear, not what they believe or what there is evidence. And I think people are prepared to stand up and say, no, actually, I don't agree with that, and this is why.
Sure.
You might not agree with me, but this is where I stand. That I like. I really like. And actually, I've tried to, I try to be like that in all aspects of my life, particularly, in work as well. And I encourage the rest of the team to do the same. So, you don't agree with me? That's fine. Tell me. But it's, don't sit there and mutter, don't sit there and disagree, just say it. And,
right.
and be honest. And when you look at people who are prepared to do that, that does inspire me. And it inspires me, and it also gives me hope. That you just think it's, there are people out there that are prepared, to take risks, but, be honest and just go for it.
What concerns you?
It's the same answer as politics. No. What concerns me? I think it is partly actually, I suppose, linked to the same answer, but it's, I suppose it's, well, let me answer it in the context of work. So, the company that I'm in at the moment, I am concerned about, state of funding.
Sure.
It's really, I'm sure not just for us, but I'm sure there's some real, there's really good science that is not being advanced just because you cannot access funding. And I think there's inefficiencies in the way, certainly in terms of public funding, that's not necessarily getting the best return. I mean, it concerns me, particularly in the UK. I think it's quite difficult at the moment in terms of getting access to funding. And I think that's gonna play out in terms of, it's going to hit productivity in terms of, development of therapeutics. It's going to hold things back. I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, you can't just say, everyone, all have, you can all have the money that you want. But I think I find it concerning when you have experiences where you think this is an absolutely solid scientific rationale here, and it doesn't get funded for a reason that is not related to its scientific merits.
Yes.
It's something else that's getting in the way of it. And you just think, that's not right.
Well, I've talked about this on an earlier podcast actually today. I mean, one of the reasons why the Life Science Success Podcast is around is because of this idea that we need to be better at telling the story of what's happening inside of the field so that hopefully the people that are listening at least get brought up to that level. Because I see the kind of this disparity of, you have a lot of investors who really don't fully understand what they're investing in. And then you have scientists on the other side who only understand the science and don't really understand how to explain it.
It's like we talk about, translation in biology, translating the science into the clinic. There's a translation that needs to be done there. You're absolutely right that, you can, and I have spoken to some incredibly well-informed investors.
Sure.
And, you have that conversation, and if it's a no, you think that's an informed no. I can take that.
Right.
I might not agree with it, but you think you're making a solid decision, but that doesn't always happen. And I think there's kind of a job to be done on both sides of that equation. Certainly when we're talking to investors, it's trying to sit in the other person's chair and think about, I need to articulate this in a way that, I don't mean this in a patronizing way, but in a way that you're going to understand.
Yes, exactly.
And I need you to articulate to me, again, not in a patronizing way, what it is you're trying to achieve. Because I know it's, you want a return on your investment, that's fine, but there's a reason why you're trying to invest in a life science company rather than, I don't know, some other other technology company or just some other
tech or oil and gas or yeah.
So I think, I think sometimes those two struggle to talk to each other, or perhaps it's just, my inexperience, because I've not, this is the first time that I've been so actively involved in trying to fundraise for a company. So, I'm not only, obviously trying to do this for the sake of the company, but I'm also on a learning curve as well.
Sure.
Which has been, I suppose, I've been fortunate over the last few months that I've spoken to a lot of investors, and no two conversations are the same. Everyone's coming at it from a slightly different perspective.
Right.
But I think there is definitely something that both sides can do to try and help with that engagement a bit more. Like I said, I'm not quite sure what it is.
Absolutely. Last question. What excites you?
For success. What excites me? I suppose again, coming back to the science, it is when you see something work.
Yes. Yeah.
There's nothing that beats it. When, we've one of our programs at the moment, it's really early. We've made a handful of compounds and they look like they're working. And you just think, wow, have we been lucky? Well, I'd like to think there's been a bit of design in this. It's not been luck. That is really exciting.
Right.
Also, on the commercial side, when you do a good deal with someone, or you just do a deal when you just, you connect with the other party, you're both aligned, you want the same thing, and you put, when you sign on the dotted line, you think this is going to be a good deal for both sides. That's exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, that's when the real work starts, because, then it's a case of, building that relationship and actually getting something of value out of it, and also enjoying it as well. Because that's another thing. It's kind of, all of us, we all work hard in our companies. You spend a lot of time there, and it should be enjoyable for people. It can still be, still be high pressure. It can still be demanding, but also, doing deals where you just think this is going to be a lot of fun and we're going to get something out of this. That's exciting to be able to do those sorts of things. And actually just being in this position where we've kind of got everything to play for. It's a bit, it's like anything else. It can always be a bit boom and bust, but it's kind of, we've got everything to play for here. We've got something of real value. We know we have. That is exciting in itself. And then going out and telling people about it, it just revs you up even more.
Absolutely. Well, Jason Mundin, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciated our conversation, and I wish you all the best as well with Ubiquigent and everything that you guys are working on.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.